Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us to Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. I am not Alex Hopkins, thank goodness.
Me neither.
I'm not anywhere near as good as she is at doing this job. Alex is out, and the show must go on. So here we are, those of you joining us live at our live YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. We'll air this show on 1690 KDMT, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable, next week. But we are so honored to be continuing our Election Watch 2018 series with the Denver Business Journal and Ed Sealover. It's been an amazing series. It's great to have you, Ed, back in here as we explore the Attorney General's race.
Thanks for having me back in.
Yep. Today, we have the honor of having George Brockler, District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District in the state of Colorado, and the Republican nominee for Attorney General. George, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and let's be honest, as we sit around looking at each other around this table with these headphones on, don't you feel like it'd just be natural to slip into, well, Rockies are half a game up with 4 games left. How do you see the game tonight, Jeff? Will they sweep, or today, I guess?
I think more people might pay attention to us, too. Yes.
Maybe we should throw some of the updates of the score in while we do this. No offense, 850, wherever you are.
Yes, no, that's great. Good. Every now and then, if we kind of hear what's happening there, is that live? Is that really happening?
This is live.
Okay,
if you're listening out there on YouTube, it is Rockies 5 and someone else's Phillies 3. Boom,
Good.
baby.
Boom. Mic drop.
Top of the 9th, 2 outs. I'm tingly. I don't know if I can focus on the AG stuff.
AG what? What race are we doing?
That's right.
George, it's great to have you here. Let's chat a little bit and just give you kind of a nice, easy softball since you're a little, distracted with the
Right.
9th inning in the pennant race here going on. Talk a little bit about your background and why you're here as the Republican nominee for AG.
I think the 4 things I try to tell everybody by way of background, and it's usually about an hour-long conversation, so I'm going to truncate that quite a bit, is that I'm a Colorado kid, grew up in middle-class Lakewood, Colorado, went to public school my whole life, graduated from Bear Creek High School, took an Army ROTC scholarship up to super military-friendly CU Boulder. And by the way, for those of you that are watching on the YouTube thing, this is going to look awkward. I don't mean it to be. I'm flying the colors right here. See if I did on the belt buckle. Now, if I didn't have that belt buckle on, that gesture would have been really awkward.
Yes.
I ended especially in light of what's happening today in D.C.
Right.
Let's stay away from any conversation
I'm
around
off the
there.
Supreme
Yes.
Court. I took it to CU, got my degrees in economics and political science, went back there for law school, started cutting class out of law school because what do you learn there, to start trying cases down in Jeffco in Golden. Met my wife, got married. We have 4 great kids. Now, along the way, I ended up prosecuting cases that, from here, there, and everywhere that people might have heard of, including the Columbine massacre cases, the only felonies that grew out of those. My partner, Steve Jensen, and I tried those. Those ended up with some pretty strong pleas and sentences to prison in cases that I think were kind of first of their kind, because they involved providing handguns to minors and stuff. And then I got called to active duty, and when I got after September 11th, came back, kept prosecuting, ended up handling the victim on the Kobe Bryant rape case. I did the mock cross-examination of her. I felt like between all those things, and at the time my wife and I had only had 2 kids, and my wife was like, look, do you want to go out and make more money so we can have more kids with each other? And I said, sure, let's do that. So I left prosecution, went into private practice. I became a plaintiff's attorney. I also did civil defense work. And then I became a small business owner. I started a law firm in Denver right about the time that the Great Recession rolled out, which sucked. But no one told me it was coming. No one actually said, Great Recession's on its way. Please don't start a business this month. We did start it.
I'll take that one.
Thank you. You could have told me, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Started in our living room, but really grew it to like 1515 Wazee, great hardware building space out there in Lodo. And it became me and 4 other attorneys, 3 support staff. Things were going really well. Represented victims, represented police, represented military folks. And then the Army called back, said, we're not done with you, and brought me on as a chief of military justice down at Fort Carson. And then about halfway through that, decided to send me out to Iraq, made me the chief of military justice for the U.S. Division North in Iraq. And when I came back, decided I'm not going to go back into business. I don't want to chase the bucks. I want to do something that I felt really passionate about and good at, and that was community safety, public safety, and becoming the DA. So I decided to run, and Jeff, as you know, 3 other people had the same damn idea, and that makes it really competitive. I won the nomination, out-hustled everybody, and then less than a month after I win the nomination, guy walks into a movie theater at 225 in Alameda and tries to murder hundreds of our community members, and that case, that Aurora Theater Massacre case, as much as any of the other great things I feel like this office has done, probably is how people know me best, and maybe how they identify the office as well. And so I did that. I'm still serving in uniform. I'm an Army colonel in our National Guard right now. My job is as the Domestic Operations Legal Advisor. Just 2 weeks ago, I was appointed as the state judge advocate for all of Colorado, which is pretty good. And we keep moving forward. I mean, look, the idea to run for Attorney General really came down to a pretty selfish reason, and that is that the state that I am about to turn over to my 4 great kids, 15, 14, 11, and 8, all public school going, just like mom and dad, just like our parents did. It's just a very different state than I inherited from my parents a little more than 4 decades ago. You know, we've always been this state of not just opportunity and family and community, community and personal responsibility, all those things that drew my parents out here from the East Coast, but we've also been a great state of balance, right? We've never been all one thing or another. As long as I can remember, we've never been all Republican or all Democrat or all conservative or all liberal. We've always had that split between the moderate Democrat governor and a legislature that may have been all Republican. We're the only state in the country that has a Democrat governor and a Republican attorney general. Only one. And it's been that way most of my life. And yet, when we had a Republican governor, we had a Democrat AG. We had Ken Salazar. And so this election, to me, represents probably the first scariest point in time where it looks like we could be on the verge of being all one thing. And it isn't just Democrat. It is being progressive. And I think that change right there, the potential for that change is enough to make someone, a Colorado kid, want to stand up and say, wait a minute, that's not who we are. That's not what Colorado's about. And that's not the kind of state that's going to keep my kids here.
And this is for the longtime listeners of our program would know this is the second time we've had you in. We were talking to you last year while you were running for governor.
I don't remember.
Block that out of memory. It's wiped.
Next question.
Talk about why you decided to make that switch into this race.
It has the word general in it, and every colonel wants to be a general. No, I'm kidding. That's a great story. So, for a long time, I had heard the possibility that General Kaufman might want to run for governor. And that talk kind of really started in March, April, May. It kept building over the summer, and yet it never happened. And along the way, I thought, okay, well, look, more the merrier. As you know, back then, we didn't have enough people in the race. There were only like 12 people in the race. We were looking for a baker's dozen, and she would have helped us with that. And I had conversations with people. I won't go into details here, but I heard from some people's names that you'd recognize that say, look, if this happens, if she decides to run for governor, I think I'm going to consider running for AG. Are you going to? And I said, no, I'm in this race. I'm in it to win it. We're going to keep moving forward. And then it got to be November. And it got to be right after the general election. And General Kaufman made the decision, I'm going to get in and I'm going to run. And I think that timing was surprising. To me particular, but I think a lot of other people who had thought about running for the AG's race. And so I started to get a lot of phone calls from people that said, so-and-so's not going to do it. I called people who I thought would. They said, too late, I'm not going to do it. I'm running for re-election for this office or doing this. And then I had a couple really important phone calls to me. One was from a guy named John Suthers who said, look, George, it really comes down, I hope I'm not talking out of school, talk about this conversation. He said, but look, it really comes down to what you want to be. He said, if you want to be the guy whose name is on every single piece of paper, gets driven around in a black SUV by state patrol, goes to all the big business ribbon cuttings and all the great sporting events and all those things, and you want to be the governor, because the governor gets to do all that. But if you want a position that has more influence and impact on local, state, and increasingly federal matters that touch your state, then you want to be your home state's attorney general. And this was over the phone, and I paused and I said, there's a black SUV? I mean, because, I didn't know that. And I was the only one laughing at that joke. Yeah, apparently. But that resonated with me. And then my good buddy, who's really the guy that's been the political genius behind us winning this 2012 crazy election, talked to me and said, look, I'm behind you 100% whatever decision you make. But look, when you started running for statewide office, was it just for that title, for that one job, or were you doing it because you thought you could make a difference for your home, that you thought you could make a difference for Colorado? And I said, man, it bums me out that those feel mutually exclusive now, but I get it. And so I talked to my wife about it, and she wasn't super excited about it, but she said, I get it. I totally understand. And I jumped in with both feet, and I've been enthusiastic ever since, and I think we're going to do great things on behalf of Colorado.
George, let me kind of shift gears there. There may be some listeners just tuning in because it's the series Election Watch 2018 that may not be really familiar with the jobs or responsibilities of the AG. So talk a little bit about what that role looks like, what an AG does, and then what you would like to accomplish, some of those top goals if you're elected in November.
Well, the Attorney General for the state of Colorado is the attorney for the state of Colorado. And by that, I mean every aspect of government except the legislature, right? So the judicial branch gets into trouble, sued. They need some type of advice. AG is there. Same thing with the governor. All those administrative agencies that exist out there, AG represents them. They are their clients. The only branch that doesn't is the legislature. If they get into trouble, they got to call Frank Azar because they don't, I don't know who they call, but they do not get the Attorney General.
Free plug for Frank.
Well
done.
Frank's a great attorney. They don't get them. But in that capacity, you can see how many different areas that the Attorney General has influence and responsibility over in terms of helping the government keep moving forward. The other fantastic obligation that the AG has, though, is to protect things like our water. All 9 of our water compacts and the 19 total number of agreements that we have. But I think the best way for people out there to look at the Attorney General is this way. The Attorney General is a defender of Coloradans. And not just through will or whim or I have a good idea on what would be great, but confined by the laws, rules, and regulations that are on our books. It's also a protector of our state, our natural resources, our water, but it's really also a guardian of our laws and our Constitution. And I have spent my entire adult life operating under at least one, sometimes 2 oaths to be a defender, a protector, and a guardian. And that's what the AG does.
Good. What do you want to accomplish if elected? What are some of your goals?
A couple different things. I want to continue to resist the temptation that we have seen in other states across this country, and it's on a bipartisan basis. It's not just Republicans or Dems, to keep this Attorney General's office from becoming some sort of a rogue political Don Quixote that's out there trying to find the next windmill to tilt at. We've seen that in California with Javier Becerra. We've seen it with Maura Healey in Massachusetts. We've even seen it down out of Texas. This isn't a one party owns this issue kind of thing. What I think I want to accomplish in part is to but to maintain a sense of integrity in this office that is immune to the winds of the political winds that blow back and forth. At 30,000 feet, the way this AG's office operates for Colorado should be almost indiscernible from whether a Democrat or a Republican does it, right? At 30,000 feet. Every AG is going to have their own things they focus on and their own projects and some policies they may want to encourage with the legislature. But at the end of the day, the enforcement and execution of our laws, rules, and regulations isn't a partisan endeavor. Just like running for DA, running for AG is a partisan process, but there are no Republican victims. There are no Democrat constituents. There are only Coloradans who are entitled to the equal protection of the laws.
And so that gets into the bigger question of what defines an activist AG, which sounds like it's what you're not wanting to become. I mean, we've seen efforts from Cynthia Kaufman, for example, to defend the state against federal climate protection rules. We've seen efforts to get involved. Some people were surprised when she's suing Purdue Pharma for the opioid crisis. What defines activist AG? What do you want to do? What line do you not want to cross when you're talking about that?
If you accept that the Attorney General's primary function is to defend this state and its inhabitants, and that includes defending its sovereignty, then every attempt by the federal government at sort of an undue overreach is something that the Attorney General should push back against. And I'll give you some numbers to back this up. Under President Obama, there were 47, I could be off 1 or 2, 47 times that a bipartisan group of attorneys general filed legal actions against the administration to prevent them from engaging in federal overreach through administrative rules, not through acts of Congress. My goodness, that would be far different. Through bureaucratic rules out of Washington, D.C. And so I'll give you an example. Waters of the United States was one that they pushed back against. That would have hijacked, 93% of the water in the state of Colorado, and our sovereignty over our water is a big deal. So they push back against that. For the Clean Power Plan, they push back against that. But what we've seen since in this administration, in like the first 20 months, is that a purely partisan Democrat-only group of AGs has filed more than 47 legal actions against this administration, not to prevent federal overreach, wait for it, to prevent federal underreach. So when the president says, I'm not going to impose waters of the United States. These folks show up to sue and say, you have to. You can't pull that rule back. When he tries to delay the Clean Power Plan so he can put in place the Clean Energy Plan, they sue him. You can't do that. You can't let states have sovereignty over our water. And that's crazy. You have to do net neutrality. I mean, an activist AG is one who says, I want the FCC to reverse its position on this 3-2 vote and force our internet at the federal level to become like a public utility through a vote, not through the debate and deliberation and compromise that takes place in Congress, but from a bureaucratic 3-2 vote that's going to change every time there's a new president. That is ridiculous. And so an activist AG is one that seeks to accomplish the goal independent of whatever the means are or the process. Very Machiavellian. I think a non-activist AG says it's not the outcome that matters as much as the process. And so for an AG that is committed to the state of Colorado, the laws we put on the books, the rules that we adopt through our the administrative means, those are the ones that the AG's office is bound to defend.
And we're going to get into a specific topic here. Before we leave this, I want to ask, would you as AG have sued Purdue Pharma for the opioid crisis?
Well, it's a very good question. Let me give you the sort of the corollary to that, or the situation I found myself. Remember, Aurora Theater happens July 20th, 2012. I don't get elected until November 6th, 7th of 2012, and in the intervening period, I'm just like you. I don't know any more than you do. I got asked that question all the time. What are you going to charge? Are you going to seek the death penalty? And the only responsible answer, and Judge Feldman, who's the Democrat nominee, was the same way, was it would be irresponsible, short of being in the office and reviewing the information, looking at the claims, comparing them to the law and it would be irresponsible, bordering on reckless, to announce at a political setting, without that information, this is what I'm going to do. So here's what I'd say. I trust the team that General Kaufman has put together. I think she's got a bunch of subject matter experts there. I think the pace that she has set to turn over every stone to try to come to the right answer here is the right approach to take. This should have never been a matter of political expediency where you just say, well, a whole bunch of other states have done it. We're going to do it too. That's silly, right? I think she's approached it the same way. My best guess is when I get into office and I've had the opportunity to review it, I will come to the same conclusion that she has. But what I will not do, because I've spent 24 years developing an expertise as someone who analyzes problems from a litigation standpoint, I am not going to sit here as a matter of political expediency and say it was the right or the wrong thing, or it's the exact approach that I would take. I have every confidence it is, but man, I'm going to leave open the possibility that I get in there and look under the hood and decide, hey, we should go this direction, that direction. Maybe there's another defendant out there.
I'm going to shift to a $31 billion economic engine and driver here in the state of Colorado, oil and gas. They're paying particular attention to this race, and there's a lot of discussion around local versus state control. Certainly there's some ballot initiatives that Colorado voters will be facing. Talk a little bit about your role as AG if elected and how you would deal with oil and gas regulation.
I think that the Attorney General, again, to keep coming back to this theme, and this is going to be the difference between me and an activist candidate, right? An activist candidate will say, I want to accomplish this goal, and so I'll provide this support to these people who want to achieve it. An AG who feels bound by the rule of law will say, what does the law say? And in this state, the law says unequivocally, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission sets the rules for permitting and exploration, and that it's a matter, and the Supreme Court has said, it's a matter of statewide concern. This isn't a matter for cities. It's not a matter for counties. It is a matter of statewide concern. Now, we have the ability to change that. We can amend the laws. We can amend the Constitution. But short of doing that, that is the law that exists. And when your client, the COGCC, says to you in a public vote that the governor called for, they want you to appeal the Martinez decision. I don't know if you guys have ever talked about the Martinez decision on the air here, but that's that decision that completely hijacked the balancing process that COGCC has gone through now for many, many years in determining whether or not to grant permits for oil drilling and exploration. This judge and made a decision, it got appealed, and then an appellate court on a 2-to-1 split. 2-to-1 split said, we're going to do away with the old balancing test. We're going to come up with our own balancing test, and they imposed this policy on them. The COGCC tells the Attorney General, General Kaufman, I want you to appeal that to the Supreme Court. Her obligation, independent of anything she thinks about the environment or the rightness or wrongness of it, is to appeal that decision. I would do the same thing. Now, what's interesting is the other person running for this race, the professor, has said if this case is still around when he's AG, he's going to withdraw the appeal, apparently over the objection of his client to do that. And that's the difference between an activist AG and someone who feels bound by the rule of law.
I mean, just to focus on that case, some people say the Martinez case is about semantics. Why is it important to continue fighting as the COGCC has asked?
Well, listen, when you have a judge redefining terms that the legislature has put in place, such that now to grant oil and gas exploration permits, you have to prioritize something the legislature could have done. Prioritize any impact on the environment and any negative impact on public health of any kind. You have fundamentally changed the balancing process that they've been engaging in for years with the guidance given by the legislature. That decision is so monumental, it's so sweeping, it's not semantics, it needs to be done by the legislature. And frankly, if the COGCC doesn't change it, that kind of a case will be used to challenge other balancing that goes on with other administrative agencies. Maybe CDPHE. They engage in some things that affect the environment and public health as well. They might suffer because of this. My guess is if you ask the head of CDPHE, he or she would tell you, I think this case ought to be appealed as well.
Couple of things, George. And earlier you mentioned water law, and I think anybody that wants to test their IQ could try and figure out water law and the difference in water compacts and why this matters to the state of Colorado, to our economic development, the vitality and ongoing relationships of anybody, including your largest in single investment, your house. Talk about water law. Anything else you want to address around that issue and what that role would look like and how you would approach challenges to Colorado's water?
Listen, this is that sleeping giant issue for the metro area. I mean, the western slope, the eastern plains, they're all hip to how this is a life or death issue for the state of Colorado. The Front Range has not gotten there yet, in part because they really haven't had to tighten their belts. And for folks on the Front Range, me included, even before got into politics, the idea of water was, hey, if I turn on the spigot, does fresh drinkable water come out? And that was it. You go to the western slope of the eastern plains, this is a matter of can we survive out here? And that's why you've seen so much emphasis on the western slope on not diverting more and more water over here. These 9 compacts are both good and bad for us. They're bad in this way. They are based on a baseline amount of water that was available in 3 of the rainiest, wettest years we've ever had. And that's what Congress imposed through these compacts, these agreements. The problem is, if we ever tried to renegotiate them, we would end up upside down on this in a worse way than we are now, because compared to California and Arizona and Nevada, we don't have the juice to keep the water that we're entitled to here in the state of Colorado under our existing compacts. The other issue is, and the AG is charged with defending these compacts, the other issue is the way these compacts exist and with the state of water today, these lower basin states like Arizona, California that get to draw off of this, if they ever made a call on our water, went to the Supreme Court and said, we're getting robbed.
Call the marker due.
Huh?
Just call the marker due.
Call their marker due, we're in trouble. Everybody I've talked to that knows a heck of a lot more about water than I do has said we lose that battle all day long. So even though you want to negotiate from a position of strength, you really have to develop cooperative relationships with these lower basin states in order to continue to defend our water in a meaningful way. Bottom line is, for the state of Colorado, we have to engage in more conservation, but we can't conserve our way out of this. We have to engage in more storage. And that is the part that gets controversial, especially with the environmental elitists out there. But if we don't do conservation and storage, we're going to have a problem, and that problem is likely to end up against us in a Supreme Court when Arizona and California say we want the water we're due.
And as the AG, where do you come in at that point? I know you've always said, hey, look, this is my role, this is somebody else's role. Storage is not the AG's role traditionally. How do you have to gird up to be ready for a lawsuit to try to get some of our water, do you feel like?
No, my hope is I don't want to rush into litigation. And frankly, that's the kind of statement you hear from someone. The person that's been to war is the person that doesn't want to go back to war. The person that's been to litigation understands what litigation risks and the toll that it takes. I'm not anxious to run to court for anything, but if I had to defend us, I would. I think the bigger issue for us is, can an AG have meaningful input with the legislature about this is where we're at, here are the risks that we face, and try to put them in a position to make an issue or to take up the issue of storage and conservation? Yes, but you don't want your attorney general to be the assistant governor. That's not what AG stands for. It's not about being an adjunct legislator. You don't want the attorney general in the business of making policy. You want them in the business of enforcing the law.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our YouTube live channel today. The show again will be airing next week as Alex is back. And this show did not break because Alex is not here and I was left in charge. I do want that on record. No one's going to buy it, but I am putting that on record. Thanks for tuning in to Election Watch 2018, our series with the Denver Business Journal here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us after the break. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us here on Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. I'm Jeff Wasden, president of the COBRT, filling in for Alex and joining our ongoing series, Election Watch 2018, with Republican nominee for Attorney General George Brockler.
That's me.
That is you. And I guess, George, you want to break the news about the important finish that just went on?
For live, it matters, right?
You might get another voter by sharing this good news.
Listen, our Colorado Rockies have just closed out against the Phillies 5-3. That's a sweep, I believe. And according to one Jeff Wasden, we have 3 more games against the cross your fingers hapless Nationals.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they rolled over. Yeah,
I don't know if that's going to happen, but that is fantastic. We're a game up on the Dodgers. I think we're 2 up on the Cards.
If they
We're
could
in
call
control
up
of
some
our
double
destiny, by the
triple
way.
A guys to finish out the season would be great. That Bryce Harper, take your vacation a little early.
Save your body.
Exactly. Well, let's jump back into our series, Election Watch with George. Ed Seelever joining us. Ed, take it away.
Yeah, we've covered a couple topics, oil and gas and water law. Before we leave those completely, though, you mentioned the idea that the AG should step in when the federal government overreaches and takes away states' rights. Are there areas that you are looking at right now where you can say the federal government is overreaching, we need to talk about, if not go forward, but talk about stepping up if I'm the AG?
Far less so under this administration, and I think we've seen that. I think really the issue is, will the other activist AGs in the country be able to defeat the attempt to pull back some of that overreach? And then we might have a different answer. But let me tell you an area that we talk about all the time where it could happen, and it's been threatened, hinted at, but never actually accomplished. And that's with marijuana in the state of Colorado. Now, I was not a fan of Amendment 64. I didn't want it stuck in our Constitution where it's way harder to fix. I didn't want to be the first out of the gate to do it. I would have rather watched Washington or Oregon trip over themselves and then figure out a better way to do it. But 55% of us put it in there. And that means if you're a rule of law person, and I am, you enforce the spirit of the law while working diligently to protect the community and your families from all the negative things that flow from it without making this all criminal. I mean, there's a ton of negative things. Most importantly, that black market marijuana stuff is going crazy. But despite that, if Uncle Jeff Sessions tried to show up, or whoever the next U.S. Attorney General is, tries to show up and say, I am going to now start to enforce over the top of Colorado federal marijuana laws that have lied dormant long enough that we took action to represent ourselves and to govern ourselves, I would use whatever tools the AG's office has, and you should know there aren't a ton of them, to push back against that. I would soapbox this thing. I would rally the Cory Gardners and Michael Bennetts and anyone else in the legislature to fight back against this, because at the end of the day, whether I agree or not with what has happened, I agree with the process, and I will defend every single day Coloradans' ability to govern themselves far more than I will the influence of bureaucrats 1,500 miles from here.
Let's shift focus into an area that we're certainly familiar with, and with the Colorado Business Roundtable. And not that I'm going to give a shameless plug for our upcoming cyber event, but certainly data breach and the issues around cyber. What does an enforcement policy look like under AG Broccoli?
Well, remember that this legislative session, there was a pretty darn good bill that got launched. Cole Wist, I think, was part of that bill, as was, I'm leaving
Jeff
him out.
Bridges.
Jeff Bridges. And I sat next to each of them and testified on behalf of this bill. And what it really does is it arms the Attorney General with some tools, but it also puts an obligation on those companies out there that possess these very sensitive pieces of information about this, personally identifying information. If they have a breach, they are mandated to report it to the Attorney General, who really acts like a clearinghouse in that way, to see what was done. Was it done correctly? Was the appropriate notification given so that people can protect themselves or fix what was broken? And at the end of the day, they have the ability to refer to district attorneys' offices for prosecution. And frankly, as Attorney General, I see the metro area offices maybe saying, sure, we'd love to have some of that action, but more often than not, I see them saying, if you want to do it, Attorney General, we'd love for you to do it. We'll keep fighting the violent crime and all that other stuff. So I think that's a great step forward for Colorado to have. We have one, I think, of the most robust data breach laws right now on the books that are out there, and I think that's a great step forward.
Now, I know when this law passed, there were business groups that were worried, especially not knowing who the next AG was going to be, about what that enforcement meant. Did it mean that, they would come in hard and spout out about what they did to everyone? Would they look to levy fines against any company that has a breach? How, in general, do you see the enforcement mechanism playing out?
Whether it's the data breach issue or any other enforcement issue, I mean, listen, I'm a seasoned prosecutor. I've been a criminal defense lawyer. I think at the end of the day, with the vast majority of businesses that operate in Colorado, and individuals for that matter, they're operating in good faith and out of goodwill, and they want to comply. And if that's the person that runs afoul of the law, we treat them far differently than we treat people who we think are trying to put their own self-interest ahead of the protection of these people who suffered the breach, or ahead of any other consumer who has been injured by their conduct. If someone makes a mistake or something bad happens to them and they come forward and say, let me tell you what happened, we want to get to the right place on this, we shouldn't be looking to find the heck out of them or crush them. We should be looking to help them get to compliance. But for those handful of companies that are out there that continue to do wrong, or to prioritize profits over protection of these people, or to prioritize their image over giving the right information to the right folks like the AG, then we do need to make an example of them, and I would.
And one more on the cybersecurity topic here. You brought up net neutrality briefly. There was efforts in the legislature last year to pass a bill essentially restoring net neutrality within the state of Colorado. If you're called on as AG to work with the legislature on something like that, where is the role for the state, the AG's office, or is there none as long as the federal government stands where it does on net neutrality?
No, and look, we've seen gosh, what state just did? Was it Washington or Oregon? Somebody just passed their own statewide net neutrality law. And as you know, the internet stops at our borders, so it's very easy to control. Oh, that's right. It doesn't. I think it's very difficult for the state legislature to enact anything that would have the kind of impact that we're looking for from Congress. Now, I think net neutrality makes a lot of sense. Not the way it was rolled out through this rule, but the concept makes a lot of sense. But I'm not sure I really trust the government to be the one making decisions about who gets what, when, where, and why, and who's exempt from it. But if they're going to do it, by golly, I'd rather it go through the congressional process where we have legitimate representation and we can do that deliberation and compromise piece. Now, if the state legislature wanted to take up that issue, I would give them the best, most expert advice available on the pitfalls of doing it and the legality of doing it. But at the end of the day, the legislature ends up getting to set the policy and priorities for the state of Colorado. Another example, I'm a huge fan of rural broadband. I want to see the people out there get rural broadband, but the Attorney General is not the position from which you accomplish that. Now, other than maybe reviewing some contracts or looking at some land use documents or something that might facilitate it, that decision has to be made by the legislature and the governor. How will they prioritize it? How will they pay for it? That is not an attorney general decision.
One issue that has come up as a potential ground where the AG's office has not stepped in much in the past, but that some candidates this year wanted it to, is the area of healthcare, whether that be healthcare transparency laws we have in the book, other areas. What do you see as the AG's role in ensuring that people have access to healthcare, that it's meted out fairly, and what is certainly not the AG's role when it comes to enforcing healthcare laws?
Such a good question. Look, the AG should not be in the business of defending Obama's legacy. The AG's office should not be in the business of trying to defend against some federal law that is controversial and is being picked at by some states and others, and Congress is going through those things. When we start saying things like health care is a right and we just make that blanket statement, all of a sudden it makes it seem like, well, the AG should have a role in defending that right. Well, we know that health care isn't a right in the way that the 10 Amendments provide us rights. It's different than that. It is something that I want every single Coloradan to have access to, but that again is a policy decision. If there are providers out there or insurance companies who are working to discriminate against a class of people, whether it's based on demographics, income, any of those other tangibles that are out there, I would want to move against them to make sure that that doesn't happen. But in terms of saying I'm going to stand up and fight for Obamacare, I don't think so. Now, we have Colorado Connect. To the extent that there are laws that provide for how that should be administered, if those are violated, man, I'm going to be right there to do it. But if you're looking for someone to become an ideological champion for a certain policy, that is not, you shouldn't be looking at the AG's office.
George, you've been pretty complimentary to Attorney General Kaufman and her running and management of that office. If elected, are there areas, though, that you would make changes? Are there areas of that office that are underutilized that you would like to beef up as terms of staffing or resources, or areas that you guys focus on?
Yeah, a couple structural things that I'd like to do differently. And for those folks that are out there listening from outside the Front Range of the metro area, one of the things I have been campaigning on since even when I was running for governor was the idea that we subscribe right now to this 1860s model of state government where everything seems to need to be located a horse and buggy ride away from the Gold Dome in case the governor calls for tea. It's 2018, man. We can do business without having to be on top of each other. In fact, even when I was in Iraq, I was still able to have broken Skype conversations on my kids' birthdays. What I think we need to do, and it does a couple different things, is we need to decentralize state government, but we can start with the AG's office. And so when you look at the fact that an $80 million budget and about 500 people, close to 300 attorneys, all work about catty corner to the Gold Dome, and yet they represent the entire state, you begin to wonder, how can we do this a little bit better? Everywhere I've gone to the West and the East have said the same thing, and you've probably heard it. We are a second Colorado. We are an afterthought.
The two Colorados.
The two Colorados. Every single policy decision that gets debated under the Gold Dome starts and stops with an analysis of how is this going to impact Denver. That isn't fair. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. So what I propose to do, and we can start with the black market marijuana and criminal enforcement part of the office. I want to grow pieces of the office in regional offices spread out into the rural parts of the state, northwest, southwest, northeast, southeast. And we can start with an investigator, maybe an investigator and a prosecutor, maybe an investigator and a prosecutor and ultimately another government a lawyer who can handle a myriad of different issues. You know, when I go out to Dan Hotzenpiller, the Democrat DA in the 7th Judicial District, he says, George, we don't have the resources of a metro area. I can't have an elder abuse unit. I can't have a domestic violence unit. I can't even really prosecute some of the lower level environmental crimes that just don't hit the AG's radar or don't hit the EPA's radar. He said, if we had someone out here from the AG's office that could do that, there's no limit to the kinds of the good we can do in this community. You talk to any of the sheriffs, and by the way, I've been endorsed by over 40 sheriffs, bipartisan group of prosecutors across the state of Colorado as well. They all say the same thing. We don't lack the knowledge, we don't lack the expertise, the will, the guts. What we lack are resources. And so if we can take some of those $80 million that are collected from around the state and push them back out there, not only do we start to chisel away at that idea that everything starts and stops with analysis of Denver, but it's rural economic stimulus, right? We're putting these great paying jobs with great benefits in places that need those jobs way more than the red hot Denver market does. And the other thing that it does is provides better customer service. I talked to Tim Foster from out in Mesa County.
Mesa.
Yeah, Mesa. Great. By the way, that's an economic driver for that community. And he was bemoaning the fact that, look, they have a great attorney in the Attorney General's office that works with them, but they never see them. They'd have to drive out here to see them. It's tough to get them on the phone. They said, why couldn't we have someone out here that could work the education issues up and down this part of the state? And I thought that's a brilliant idea. So that's a structural change I'd want to make. I want to enhance one specific area of the office, two specific areas that I know I want to enhance. Consumer protection. And really what I want to do are to develop some working groups that are from stakeholders in each one of the major industries, whether it's real estate or anything else, let's say. And I want to bring in consumer advocates. I want to bring in Realtors Association people, independent realtors. I want to bring in the people who operate outside the Realtors Association, like the Tree Lauras, like the Josh Hunts. Bring them in and say, where is our enforcement falling down? Where are the holes we're missing? What are we doing wrong? How can we be righter about this? And we do that with enough things. Not only do we have a better job of enforcing, but maybe we generate an idea that some legislator comes along and says, I'd like to make that part of the statewide policy. The other one is the Office of Community Engagement, which I think was a brilliant move by General Kaufman to put in place. They have the Domestic Fatality Review Board, and even though these are going to be criminal things, they matter. I think that's a fantastic way to look in the rearview mirror at horrible cases and figure out where were the red flags we missed, what could we have done better. Well, I want to expand that to things like human trafficking, maybe even the opioid, and I know there's an opioid working group. This one would be focused more on the opioid deaths, maybe even to the extent that I could find the authority in the law to do it, to even look at suicides, to try to figure out what is it we're missing. Are there things that we as the Attorney General's office have tools in our toolbox to try to help address this issue? I'm a huge fan of Safe to Tell. As you know, that's the big texting thing they have. The Cadillac, in my opinion, no offense to the AG's office, is Text-A-Tip down in Douglas County, and that's the one that we use to thwart that sort of Thelma and Louise school shooting scenario down there at Mountain Vista. I want to see that enhanced, rolled out, and more PSAs about it to get more and more kids to use it. Those are just a few of them. I can go on and on, but I see we are running out of time.
No, that's all right, because I'm going to ask you a question that's a little bit similar to that, but I mean, that's kind of talks about how you utilize the office differently. Are there areas that the office needs to pay more attention to? Are there particular areas of crime? Are there particular things that maybe you looked at and said, the AG needs to do more work in these particular areas?
Yes, but not as a function of a failure on the AG's part, as a function of we are on a glide path here to continue to improve what we're doing. Remember, 10 or 15 years ago, we weren't talking about human trafficking. That is something that has really been tackled intensely over the last handful of years. And the AG's office has been great partners in that. In fact, our human trafficking unit, which we stood up, and I'm going to give a shout out to our prosecutor, who was just named Prosecutor of the Year by the FBI for her role in human trafficking. She tried a case with someone from the AG's office where we got the largest human trafficking sentence to prison in the history of the United States. A guy named Brock Franklin, 472 years in the Department of Corrections. That is a message to those flesh peddlers.
Will he get out in that time frame?
Well, listen,
412 years?
with this DOC, who knows, man? I can't. I don't know. But I'll say this. I think that what needs to happen with the next step is we need to continue to enhance that human trafficking presence. But again, Not in the metro area, that could be a support, but I really think outside the area into those parts of the state that just don't have the resources. And what I think we're going to find is human trafficking right now, we've really focused on the sex part, which is important, don't get me wrong. But there's another component of human trafficking, and that is labor trafficking. And I think we're more likely to find that out there on the east and in the more rural areas than we are going to find it in the metro area. And I'd like to see us expand our looks at labor trafficking, and I'd like to see us push all of that out into the rurals that have less resources. I'd like to do the same thing with our attacks on the black market marijuana grows. You know, I was promised, just like you were, that if we passed Amendment 64, the black market would go the way of the dodo. Well, as we know, that didn't happen. Instead, all we've done is professionalize the black market, and it is as robust. I've only been doing this 24 years. It is as robust as I've ever seen it in the state of Colorado, and not with that low potency street swag stuff that you guys used to buy from each other in college. I'm kidding. I'm joking. But we're talking high potency stuff. I was listening to a member of law enforcement say that there are techniques now when they make this stuff called shatter, which is some of the oils and stuff they get out of the marijuana, that they are getting potency north of 90% THC levels. I mean, that's incredible. When you consider the fact that THC is a hallucinogenic drug, that's why it's always been considered a Schedule 1, that is potentially lethal. That is a crazy problem to have out there, and the rurals just don't have the tools to get it done. I want to see us enforce harder on that. The one other thing I really want to see us focus on, and I know Cynthia has been great at starting down this road, I want to push the consumer protection piece a lot harder and broader around the state. I want people's first reaction when they think they've been ripped off is, I'm going to call the police, and if I don't get satisfaction, my next call is to the Attorney General's office. And if that requires PSAs, so be it. But I really want to see us play a much more robust role in getting the information out.
George, we're entering into, obviously, election season. That's why you're here today, as we look at Election Watch 2018. You may have heard there's a race for governor going on.
In Colorado?
Here in the state.
I thought when I left, they just closed it all up. They said, that's it.
Some wanted to. You've got a Senate president who's termed out, a new speaker coming in as Crisanta's, again, termed out, control of the Senate in jeopardy. Talk a little bit about your role with that state legislative body, a new governor, in your role if elected as AG.
The legislative piece, no one's asked me that, and I think that's a good point. I think what you need to do is to develop a relationship with the legislature where they look at you as a square dealer, a fair dealer, that your advice to them is going to be the same whether or not you believe in the policy or whether or not it satisfies some Republican leadership demand or Democrat leadership demand. I think you need to have, and you know who I look at for that as a good model, in my opinion, was John Suthers too. And I think Cynthia has worked hard on that. She just hasn't had the 8 years to get there where John did. But I want to be that guy to them. And along that same vein, my first meeting with any governor, whether it's Stapleton or Polis, is going to be the same. And that is, I will tell them, if you have a policy you want to achieve, whether I agree with it or not, as long as it's lawful and constitutional, I will help you navigate the legal waters to get there. I will give you the legal advice necessary to help you accomplish it. But if your policy violates either our laws or our Constitution, you should expect a much different answer from your Attorney General.
And in that way, I'm kind of curious, how do you feel like, and I want to open this up, but not just give you the chance to throw grenades at an opponent who can't throw them back. How do you feel you differ the most?
Isn't that the best way?
Yes. How do you feel you differ the most from your opponent in terms of policy, especially directed toward business?
Well, let me say something nice about Phil, right? I think Phil is a guy who has done a tremendous job with that intersection between technology and entrepreneurship. I think that he has provided a couple different vehicles there for businesses to try to launch and get off the ground and get some guidance. I think all of that's good, but I also think I'm the only guy that's been a small business owner. I'm the only guy that's ever had to write checks to everybody in the firm but himself because of the climate that was there, because of the economic climate. I know what it means to hire, fire, unemployment, workers' comp. I've done all that stuff. So when I come to the approach of regulation, especially at the Attorney General's office, I come to it with an understanding, and my wife's a small business owner for 18 years. I come to it with the understanding that how government enforces its rules and regulations can have a very deterrent effect, a negative effect on the business climate. If there isn't predictability, if there isn't stability, then I think the business climate suffers because of that. I think that's a big difference that I bring to the table from my opponent is I've actually been a small business owner. I've had to earn a living on the economy and not on a government dime. I think that's a big difference maker, and my wife does too.
And just in terms of the policies that you would implement as well. I mean, that's a good background question, but for everybody who's listening, no, we're going to ask the same question to Phil Weiser tomorrow here.
Yeah,
so
understood.
this is not going to be one-sided. But I mean, how do you see? I mean, we could talk about. I'll do this. I'll
Oil,
do that.
gas,
What's
water, pick
really
some of those.
going
Yeah.
to be different under a Brockler AG than under a Weiser AG?
Great.
Well, one, the activism part. You are not going to see me try to use whatever tools are in the toolbox to accomplish a policy objective that hasn't been directed by the governor or the legislature. I'm not going to act outside my role as defined by those laws, rules, and regulations. I want to have a robust presence in consumer protection, but I want to make sure that this economy is working, firing on all pistons, not because I have the policies in place to do it, but because I am going to provide to those businesses predictability and stability in how those things get enforced, and I'm going to make our enforcement better by creating those working groups of stakeholders around those different regulated industries to find out what is working, what isn't working, how can we move forward. There is no one specific thing that you could tune one way or tune the other that's going to make all the difference in the world. But what you're going to get from me is not a guy who's looking to run anybody into the ground or looking to accomplish some sort of partisan political objective through whatever laws that are on the books. I'm looking to enforce the laws, create predictability and stability for the business community. And the responsibility piece goes with that. But like I said, I think most businesses, the vast majority, out of good faith and goodwill, are trying to follow the law. We should make that as easy as possible. You've seen the number of regulations that have exploded in the state. It's crazy.
Completely agree with that, and thank you for recognizing that. I think really that's a key factor to mention, right? The intentions of business and the good actors in this state, all, across industries, and people wanting to do well. George, we're kind of nearing the close here in the last minute.
Objection.
Give folks a chance to kind of to get to know you. Talk to the voters of Colorado. Ballots are out here within a couple of weeks. Make your final pitch, and then during that pitch, how do folks get to know more about George Brockler, learn about you, or even donate to you if they're so?
We'll go in reverse order. You can bring me money. Sacks, whatever. No, I'm kidding. Go to george2018.com, george2018.com. Easy website because I'm so simple. Look, the bottom line is this. We have two very stark distinctions here, I think, between the two AG candidates. I have spent a career in every single courtroom in the state of Colorado, municipal, state, federal, even military. I have handled cases from every single angle. I'm the only candidate that's ever set foot in a courtroom in Colorado courtroom for something other than a tour. I'm the only candidate who's practiced Colorado law, and I've been doing it for 24 years. If you want a Colorado kid who puts the state of Colorado first, not his own political ambition, not his own ideological goals, if you want someone who will call balls and strikes and enforce the laws in a fair, even-handed way, and not try to turn this position into some sort of federal foil against an administration, this is the guy you want. Someone in this race has said they jumped into it because of who's in the White House. I jumped into it because of who's in Colorado.
Well, thank you, George, for spending the time with us here at 1690 KDMT. Connect and collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. We wish you nothing but success in your race. Tomorrow, tune in as we listen to your Democrat opponent, Phil Weiser.
Go Rockies.
Go Rockies. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks,
Boom.
everyone.